walk us through in terms of when we talk about, trying to assess, in terms of laying out a nutrition plan and trying to assess, what are things like resting metabolic rate equations for younger athletes?
Yeah, so I guess if we look at an athlete's energy requirements, that they're primarily driven by their total energy expenditure, which we can break down into three different subcomponents. So we've got, first of all, the resting metabolic rate. We've then got the thermic effect of food or diet-induced thermogenesis, and then with this activity energy expenditure, which is highly variable, from individual to individual. And obviously we know that body composition, and in particular fat-free mass, is closely related to resting metabolic rate. So what we did was assess body composition via DEXA and resting metabolic rate via indirect calorimetry across the academy from under 12s up to under 23s. What we then wanted to do was look at measured resting metabolic rate compared to estimated resting metabolic rate from a number of different prediction equations that were commonly used, both common in the literature, but commonly used within applied practice as well. And we selected 5 different prediction equations because they fitted at least one of our 2 predetermined criteria. So they were developed within the age range that we were looking at, so across those adolescent years, which we thought was important, and B, they were at least sort of healthy, active individuals. So we didn't use obese populations or disease populations. Yep. They had to be healthy and fit and active and within the years. So as you'd expect, there was increases in stature and body mass as they progressed through the pathway,
for sure.
And the increases in body mass were primarily driven from increases in fat-free mass, so i.e. muscle and organs.
Yeah.
And actually we found that there was no change in absolute fat mass across the age groups, which was interesting.
Wow, yeah. So
fat-free mass increased, no change in fat mass, which meant that percent body fat then, decreased as they progressed.
Mm-hmm.
And similarly, in accordance with the increase in fat-free mass, there was also an increase in resting metabolic rate as they progressed, as they got bigger and progressed through the academy pathway. And again, not surprising given that we know fat-free mass is the most metabolically active compartment.
Mm-hmm.
So when we then compared the measured values for resting metabolic rate against the predicted values, we concluded that, at least in the equations that we used and in our populations, they were inappropriate to use. And generally they underestimated resting metabolic rate, and in some cases as much as 850 kilocalories per day.
Wow. I mean, that's a pretty big insight when we think about practitioners and coaches using these equations to be able to estimate, okay, my athlete's going to need this much fuel, my young athlete's going to need X amount of calories, and now all of a sudden we put it to the test. We have the lab actually testing, we have measured up against these equations, and then you guys are uncovering that actually we're really underestimating here. And as you mentioned, I mean, up to what, 800 calories, is it?
Which is, 2 sort of small, very large meal for an individual. And, as you say, if you as a practitioner are basing some of your energy prescription calculations off these prediction equations, you could be in a whole host of problems. That coming back to the topical low energy availability and red S, relative energy deficiency in sport. If you're underestimating and underfueling by, say, 850 calories day on day, week on week, month on month, that can lead to a whole host of, health and performance implications.
Absolutely. And in your time and experience, what are some of the symptoms that might come up in kind of youth or academy athletes, or I mean, any athletes for that matter, but for this conversation that again, coaches or practitioners might sometimes miss if they're not realizing that they could be out by quite a few calories in terms of the amount of fuel these athletes are needing?
I think that broadly, we can divide them into health implications and performance implications. I think there's a whole host of different health and performance implications, but I think some of the ones that are more pertinent to the youth athlete, and particularly the growing and developing athlete, we can see a stunting of growth. So a failure to reach potential adult height. Yep. Delayed maturation, predominantly delayed sexual maturation, and in females that could be the delayed onset of menstruation.
Mm-hmm.
Lower bone mineral density in some of these athletes. Here now, so an increased risk of fracture now, but that could also lead a lower bone mineral density, failure to reach a better or a peak bone mass, be a reduced peak bone mass, which could lead to problems,
down the road, 30,
right? 50 years down the line. So, here and now problems, but down the line. And also a impaired immune system, getting sniffles and colds and coughs frequently.
Yeah, that's a big one. That frequent colds, coughs, run down is one that we know young athletes are logging in those long hours, as you mentioned, and they're training hard, but that's definitely one that can creep up along with some of those other, persistent fatigue and things that should start to set off some red flags for coaches again.
Yeah, and then I think for some of the performance implications, there's loads of different physical performance, endurance, strength, power reductions, but even things like, as you alluded to, concentration and mood swings and irritability, and those kind of things. That can affect not just their sport, but school and home life and friendships and all that kind of stuff. So there's a whole host of different implications of RED-S that are particularly pertinent to the youth athlete.